All right, good morning. Hope everybody's had a great week. Appreciate the opportunity and the privilege we have to be back in the Lord's house this morning. Appreciate the goodness of God. God's been good to us. He has. He's been good to me. I appreciate his blessings, his mercies. Appreciate the words Brother Kenny brought. I appreciate his opening remarks. Well, it's a concern that we should all keep, is this thing of having apathy. And, start reflecting inside and looking at ourselves instead of just how blessed we really are. But God's been good to me, and I just want to tell him I love him this morning. I appreciate all that he's done for me. He's just a good God. And, I spoke, 3 weeks ago, and I mentioned a lot about the church and reflecting about some times past and thinking about some good times that we had and some things that you could call to your remembrance to rejoice over. And this morning, we're going to kind of, as far as dealing with the church, we're in Revelation. We're still right there in Revelation. Chapter 4 is the lesson. I will spend a great amount of my time this morning in the last portion of chapter 3. There's some words there that really grip me that kind of introduce chapter 4. But a lot of the lesson this morning deals with the rapture. And you think about apathy and what Kenny was just mentioning. A lot of these things can be overcome. We don't have our minds right. We're looking at our circumstances, and we look at things day to day and where we are, what we have to do this day, whether it be our job, what do we got to do, the things that encumber about our mind, but are we really living in light of the rapture? And if we really think about it, and if anything, the way this situation's been these last couple of months, it ought to really get us thinking about the rapture, because I just believe, we'll talk about this a little bit more detail in a few more minutes, but there's just things that are happening, and especially I just believe, I love the timing of the quarter that we're in Revelation as far as some signs of the times, and that interests me greatly. But again, today's lesson kind of begins the final leg of a threefold outline that Jesus actually gave for this book in Revelation, and he did it in chapter 1, verse 19. You can flick back there and read it, but he told John, he said, "Write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are," number 2, and number 3, he says, "and the things which shall be hereafter." Now, within the first 3 chapters of Revelation, first of all, we've already went through the things which thou hast seen, which was in chapter number 1. And what was seen there, John saw a glorified Christ. And he was glorified, his head and hair white as snow, his eyes as a flame of fire. His feet were likened unto fine brass, and his countenance as a sun that shineth in his strength. And then in number 2, it says the things which are. Well, that's what we've been dealing with the last 7 weeks. 6 weeks in here are the things which are, and that's chapters 2 and 3, and that was a message to the 7 churches, the church age. And one thing that we've really not mentioned as we've went through the 7 churches, we've not really mentioned is that the spiritual state of each church, it really represents through periods of history. It's kind of chronological, and it goes all the way from Ephesus up to Laodicea, from the beginning of the church age to where we're at now. Ephesus, typical of the first century, typifies the first century where they'd lost their first love. Smyrna, you go back and study your church history, spiritually speaking, it's the 2nd century where the church was being heavily persecuted. The 3rd church was Pergamos, kind of takes you up through the 3rd to 6th century. It was a compromising church mixed with the world. And then you make your way up to Thyatira, and it was through the Dark Ages, and it was a time of idolatry. And you get into Sardis, a period from about 1500 to 1800. It was known as a dead church, and there was only a few that remained. But then you get up to the Church of Philadelphia, which goes to the 18th and 19th century, and it was an outbreak of great revivals. A lot of great revivals and great awakenings came in the 18th century, a lot of them right here in America. Great revivals. And then, as Kyle brought last week, you want to know where we're at today? We're in the church at Laodicea. That's the age we're in. And unfortunately, the church of Laodicea, this present day, is the lukewarm church. It's that final state of what Kenny mentioned this morning, apostasy. It's that final state of apostasy, and that's where we're at. That's where we're at in the times we're in. So, we move on. That was points 1 and 2 as far as the outline that Jesus gave in chapter 1, verse 19. But he says, I also want you to write down the things which shall be hereafter. And that's where really we start today as we go on throughout the rest of the book of Revelation. You have the rapture of the church, and there's a scene of heaven, and that's chapters 4 and 5. And really, 4 and 5 really go together. And then you have the 7-year tribulation period, which is going to be chapters 6 through 18. It's going to be a real interesting read as we go through that. And then in chapter 19, you have the second coming of Christ, and then the marriage of the Lamb. Chapter 20, there's the millennial reign, and then there's a judgment to come with that. And then chapters 21, 22 speaks of the new heaven and the new earth. Now, this morning we begin in chapter number 4. And it takes us really to the rapture of the church. And I think what I'm going to do now, I think we're going to read the 11 verses in chapter number 4, because I don't know how much, it might take me a little bit to get to chapter 4, because I'm really interested in verses 20, 21, and 22. You want to know where we're at on May 3rd, 2020? We're in verses 20, 21, and 22. And we'll get to that in a minute. So let's go ahead and read the lesson. At least I'll get that part of it read. All right, let's look in chapter number 4, beginning verse number 1. It says, "After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven." Keep note of that door. "And the first voice which I heard was as it were a trumpet, talking with me, which said, Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven." Now notice there's a door, a voice, and a throne. Just keep that in mind. A door, a voice, and a throne. First things he's mentioned. "And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about the throne, and sight like unto an emerald. And round about the throne were 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment. And they had on their heads crowns of gold. And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God." Right there, 4 words I want you to keep in mind that we're going to bog in a little bit. What these things that John saw. He saw a door, he heard a voice, he saw a throne, and he saw the Spirit. All right, now let's move on. There's a reason I'm emphasizing that, is because I want to back up. And we're going to back up into verse 20, 21, and 22 of chapter 3. All right, verse number 6. "And before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal. In the midst of the throne, and round about the throne, were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind. And the first beast was like a lion, and the second beast like a calf. The third beast had a face as a man. The fourth beast was like a flying eagle. And the 4 beasts had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within. And they rest not night and day, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. And when those beasts give glory and honor and thanks to him that sat on the throne, who liveth forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him that sat on the throne, and worship him that liveth forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. All right, now, that's chapter number 4, which is our lesson. And remember, Jesus told his disciples, as we get into this scene of the rapture, we're coming up to this now to the rapture of the church. And Jesus told his disciples in John 14, Let not your hearts be troubled. I'm kind of paraphrasing through the first 3 verses here. He says, In my Father's house are many mansions. And he says, I go to prepare a place for you. And he says, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. So again, I ask you this morning, well, where are we? You say, well, we're sitting right here in the church. Well, in a broader sense, I'm saying, where are we this morning in relation to the Bible, chronologically speaking? Where are we on May 3rd, 2020? Where are we at as we go through the Bible? Well, we're not in chapter 4. We're not quite made it to chapter 4. I'll tell you where we're at. We're at where Brother Kyle left off last week. We're in chapter number 3. We're in chapter number 3. And that is that lukewarm Laodicean church age. that state of apostasy. That's where we're at. And again, specifically, I want to look at verses 20 through 22 of chapter number 3. So let me read that. So after revealing their condition, Jesus kind of closes his message. This is his last message to the church now. He's given 7 messages. And each one of these churches stacks up in the period of time. And here we are to the Laodicean age, right where we're at. And this is the last words, his last message that he gives to the church. So let me just read this, verse number 20, chapter number 3. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him, and he with me. To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I also overcame and am set down with my Father in his throne. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Now here's what caught my attention. I'm thinking, Lord, there's just something there. And not that I'm going to do a great job with it this morning, but I'm just going to show you what the Lord showed. I just kept looking at this. There was a door. There was a voice on the other side of the door. There was a throne. And in the verse 22, Spirit is mentioned, and it's capitalized. That's the last message that was given to the church. That's the last message that he gave to the church. You open up in chapter 4, what did we read? Well, there's a door, and there's a voice, and there's a voice that's still on that side of the door. There's a throne, and then you get into verse number 5, at the bottom, it's capitalized again. There's a Spirit of God. And that capitalized meaning like a noun, it's a person. It's speaking to him as a person. So that's where I'm at this morning, and that's what kind of piqued my interest as I saw this. So again, kind of in summary, what Jesus said here, his last words to the church, his last message was, in verse number 20, he makes a plea to the church. He says, if you'll open the door, he says, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice, he says, open the door, I'll come into him and will sup with him and he with me. If you'll open that door in this age in which we live in now, if we'll open the door to our heart, he says, I'll come into you. If you'll open the door, if the church will open its door, we as individuals, we make up the church. If we'll open up our heart, I'll come in and sup with you. In other words, I'll restore fellowship with you. We'll have renewal and we'll have revival. But you got to open your heart. Just open the heart. Get out of this, the apostasy that you're in this period of being lukewarm, and just open the door, and I'll come sup with you. And again, this is the message to the church. The last words, the last message, his last three verses of his message to the church, where we're at today. And not only does he make a plea to the church, but then he makes a promise. And his promise is to those that overcome. Hey, to those of you that are born again, you're saved, you'll sit with me and my Father in his throne. And that's kind of where he's left us at. He just kind of left us with a challenge, and that's where we're at in the church age. We need to open our heart, get out of this state of apostasy and the spirit of apostasy we're in, open the door of our heart, and let him come sup with us and fellowship with us. We'll have a spirit of renewal. We'll have a spirit of revival. You know, we had that revival in 2009. There wasn't a great spirit of apostasy within the church at that time. It just wasn't so. You know, Brother Rudy made mention a week or two ago, and I thought he was right, that this whole thing, especially this last couple of months, is just this oppressive spirit. And I think it's just a spirit of wondering, of uncertainty. You just don't know, and you're not sure. We've been knocked out of our routine, so to speak. We've got that oppressive spirit about us. But again, a spirit of apostasy. But if you open the doors to your heart, if we quit getting our mind on everything that we're seeing and bombarding our minds with 24/7 on the news and on Facebook, social media, and everything else, and get back in this book and get back praying and get back looking to the Lord. That's where our help and that's where our hope's going to come from, is getting along with the Lord. So, again, Jesus' final words, his message to the church, and that's where we are today. And the message was, to those of you playing church, he says, you better make your calling and election sure. And to those of you that are living afar off, you better open the door. Open that door for fellowship, for revival, for renewal, and I'll sup with you. Now why? Why is he challenging them in the last days? That's his last message to the church. That's his last message to me and you right now. He's challenging us. Open your heart and let me in. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the next thing we come to is chapter 4. Well, so as we transition from the church, the things which are, to heaven, the things hereafter, again, stay in verses 20 through 22. Those words that I highlighted, those 4 words, all right? Jesus mentions in his last message for John, he's going to repeat these things in chapter 4, which we said. He said, behold, let me go a little bit more in depth. He said, behold, I stand at the door. What's a door? Well, a door is an entry or a passageway that takes you from one place to another. You think about it, you've got a door, there's 2 sides of that door. There's this side and there's that side. There's here and there's there. There's 2 sides of that door. There's a door right there. There are doors right there. We had to go through that door to get from the parking lot to the sanctuary, okay? There's a door. You've got to go through that door. And then he says, if any man hear my voice. But here's what I want you to notice. Notice this. Go back in verse number 20. He said, if any man hear my voice and open the door, he didn't say, if you hear my voice, come up here to me. What did he say? He says, I'll come to you. That's because it's not time for us to come up there with him. We're in the church age. This is where we're at today. He says, if any man hear my voice and open the door, he says, I will come into him and I'll sup with him. I'm coming through the door to you. So again, the voice. And the voice is coming from the other side of the door. And he says, if you'll open the door, then I'm going to come from this side of the door and I'm coming into you. I'm coming into you. All right? He says, I'll come to you, and he says, I'll sup with you and you with me. And again, he's speaking to the church. He says, I'll come to your heart and we'll renew fellowship. So how's he going to do that? Well, we're in the church age, are we not? How's he going to do that? How he closed it out in verse 22, he does it through the Spirit. He's going to come through the Spirit. I mean, he's the comforter, and he's the one on this side of the door, and that comforter is what he's left with us. That's what he's left with. That's why it's a capital S. That's the third part of the Trinity. He's the comforter, the Spirit. So, and what does the comforter say? The comforter says, to you that overcome, in verse 21, he says, you can sit with me on my throne. So again, the conclusion. You've got these 4 key words. There's a door that allows passage from here to there. There's a voice, and it's calling from the other side of the door. There's the Spirit, that third person who speaks to the church. And when that door is open, will come and minister to us. But then there's that throne that's to come. There's that throne that's going to be available to those that overcome. The door, the voice, the Spirit, and the throne. So, how do we know the church age is over? How do we get to chapter 4? Here we are. It's May 3rd, 2020. We're sitting here in the church. We've just heard Jesus' message. This is the last message he's gave to the church right here in these 3 verses. So how are we going to make it to chapter number 4? How are we going to get to heaven? What's got to happen next? Well, let me read it. 1 Thessalonians 4. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse number 14, 15. I'm going to verse number 16. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven, and with a shout, and with what? With a voice. Notice something about that voice. With the voice of the archangel, and with what? A trump. And we'll get back to that in a minute. And with the trump of God. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore, comfort one another with these words. We have a hope. How are we going to get to chapter number 4? Let me read one more passage of Scripture to you. 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15 in verse 51 and 52. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last what? Trump. What's his voice like? A trump. At the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So again, how are we going to get to chapter number 4? What's next? We're sitting here and it's May 3rd. What gets us to chapter 4? What's got to get us to heaven? The rapture. That's what we're waiting on. We're waiting on the rapture. That's where we're at, the rapture. Is anything preventing us from the rapture? Nope, not a thing. Could happen anytime. Could happen tonight, could happen now, could happen tomorrow, anytime. The rapture. So, again, the rapture. We ought to be excited about the rapture, not stay in this state of apostasy. Do we realize how close we are? I think we neglect and we fail to realize just how close we are to checking out of here. We're right here in Revelation, the last message, the last words he had to the church, they're done. He might as well, I've just read them to you. I just give you his last message to the church and where we're at on May 3rd. We got to get to chapter number 4. The only thing that's going to get us chapter number 4, what are you waiting on? Well, it's not going to be death, it's going to be the rapture of the church. And that's where we're at. And we ought to be excited again about the rapture. You ought to look for it. We really should look for it. And if we can't see it in the signs and times we live in, we're just not looking. Because the signs and times show us the rapture is near. And you think about, Brother Tommy, think about, you've heard this all your life probably is being preached to. And about other preachers 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago saying it could be today, it could be today. Well, 60 years ago, did you ever think things would be like they are today? I mean, we're in the pace, the accelerated pace and the rapid pace of change. You think back just 10 years ago. You can think back just 20 years ago. Now, here's a scary thought. As fast as the acceleration and the pace is moving, think ahead. What about 10 years from now? What about 20 years from now? And the signs of the times aren't around us? Hey, there's a lot of signs in the Bible. We don't have time to address them all. But you got to look for the signs. The Bible says, Paul wrote about living in perilous times. You know what perilous times means? That word peril means radicalized. Are we not in perilous times? Is there not a movement of radicalization in our politics? In everything. Everything has become so radicalized. And again, it goes back, Kenny's open this morning, back to apostasy. That's another perilous. It's radical. It's apostasy. Perilous times. Look for the signs. But you know, really, not only should we look for it, but we ought to live after it. If it really makes an impression on us, like it should, and it doesn't. And look, I'm the first in line to admit, I just live day to day. But boy, I'm so guilty of neglecting the thought of the rapture. I don't think we realize that literally our toes are dipped in the water. We're right there. We are right there. We ought to live after it. And if we'll live, if we expect him to come, it'll make a difference in our life. And that's nothing I said there is nothing new. But it's just so true. If we'll live in light of his return, we'll live differently. We'll change some habits. We'll be a whole lot more careful about some things. We'll have a whole lot more sense of urgency about the things of God. I promise you that. We'll change a lot of priorities if we would live in light of the rapture. But I thought of this. I long for it. I long for the rapture. Now, I've said this before in the men's class. I'll say it again. When I first got saved and I started hearing preaching about the rapture, keep in mind, I didn't grow up in church. Look, this is new to me. This is some 32 years ago now. And I start hearing preaching about the rapture. And, I'm a new convert, just got married, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm ready to go. This thing's new to me. I'm just learning the church. I'm enjoying church pretty good. I just got married. I'd like to experience married life. What about my children? I'd like to experience having children. Am I really ready to go? I can just tell you 32 years later, I'm ready to go. Now, Jordan, Kenny, that's not a knock on y'all that after being with y'all, I'm just saying that as you get older, you just begin to realize what a low land of sorrows we live in. Is there some good times? Sure. There's some good times here, but I tell you, there's a lot of heartbreak here. There's a lot of sadness, the sicknesses and the cancers and the things that you just can't explain. I always hear all the time, why do bad things happen to good people? There's just some things that you just can't answer. There's some things you just can't give an answer to. But we ought to long for the rapture. I tell you, the rapture would solve a whole lot of problems. You think about where you're at, whether it be in your health physically, whether it be in the state of mind you are mentally, whether it be where you're at financially, I don't know. I'm just telling you this, the rapture solve a whole lot of problems. And it's going to solve a whole lot of problems. But we ought to long for it. We ought to long for it. Make every day count. And again, we ought to encourage each other by it and not be discouraged. Lift up our heads, our redemption draweth nigh. And we don't know what tomorrow holds, but the Lord does. But we ought to live in light of the rapture. Now, having said that, here we go, and I've got to finish it up. Get you out of here. Let me finish up. And I knew, that's the reason I read chapter 4 of the verses first, because I knew I was going to have a hard time getting back to chapter number 4. So we move over to chapter number 4. Let me make a few comments, and we'll close. I mentioned those 4 words. In verse 20, there's a door. In verse 20, there's a voice. Again, there's the door. In verse 21, there's a throne. Again, there's a throne at the end of verse 21. At the end of verse 22, we mention the Spirit. But you go to chapter number 4, and John begins reading. He says, after this. After what? What do you mean, after this? After this looks back on what's just got finished. After chapter 3. After the church age. Really, after the rapture, as far as that goes. After this. Now we're into heaven. Going this point forward for the next several lessons, now we're into heaven. Now we're going to see this week, primarily next week, Brother Ray, you know how I craftily left you to be able to explain the 4 beasts and the 24 elders in those stones and that rainbow. I done you wrong. Now, a lot of 4 and 5 go together, and a lot of the 24 elders really goes into next week as far as the redemption goes. And I just left you a lot of liberty. There you go. I just left you a lot of liberty. But anyway, we're in chapter 4. We've made it. We're in chapter number 4. We're in heaven. All right. And what did it say? It says, after this, I looked, and what's he behold? There's a door. But notice this. And the door was opened which way? In heaven. Before, the door opened to give access to come into the church while we're here in earth. Not this time. That's over. This door this way is swinging out. I said we come into here. Well, we went from the parking lot to the sanctuary, all right? But now, it's kind of there to here and here to there. Now, we're not coming into the world. The door's opening up, and we're getting out of here, and we're going into heaven. We're finally on that other side of the door where that voice has been coming from the whole time. All right. So there's that door, and that door's swinging open. And he says, what's he say after that? And with the door in heaven was open, and the first voice which I heard. Right when he opens that door, what's he hear? There's a voice. There's that voice. That same voice that's behind the door now, that's wanting in our hearts. He's still there. But this time, he's not coming here. We're going there. That door swings both ways, see? Now it's swung the other way. We're heading that direction, in heaven's direction. He heard a voice, and again, the door opens from there to here. And Jesus, again, he's the voice behind the door. And again, this time he allows the door to swing open for us to enter into heaven. So, no longer is Jesus looking to communicate to his church in the earth. He's not interested in the door opening this way anymore. That's done. That's over. The church age is over. It's all up in glory now. It's all up in heaven. All right? And then he says what? He says, I saw a voice which I heard, as it were, a trumpet. Oh, I guess that's a coincidence. Talking with me, which said, come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and what's he do? Boy, he beheld the throne, didn't he? What did Jesus tell the church, to the overcomers? If you'll overcome, to you that are saved, get your heart right. To you that are playing church, and you've got a false profession, get your heart right. To those others, get renewed, get revived. To you overcomers, he said, to him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as also I overcome and am set down with my Father in his throne. It places us in the throne. Go to chapter number 4. I heard, as it were, of a trumpet talking with me, which said, come up hither, I will show thee the things which must be hereafter. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was in heaven, and one sat on the throne. There we are, right there at the throne. Everything that he tried to tell us in his last message to the church is now happening as we enter into heaven. See the connection. I'm not doing a great job of it, but I hope you can see the connection I'm trying to make of his last message that he gave to the church, and how when we roll into heaven in chapter 4, there it is. Everything he said come true. Everything he said. This Bible is just a wonderful book. It's just a wonderful book, the way it's marvelously put together. But there's that throne. But we said all that was going to be accomplished in the earth by the Spirit. And that's in chapter 22. It's capitalized by the Spirit. He mentions that to every church about what the Spirit saith unto the church is the Spirit. The Spirit's all capitalized. Drop down to verse number 5. And out of the throne proceedeth lightnings and thunderings and voices. Chapter 4, verse 5. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 what? Spirits of God. Capitalized again. 7's the number of completion. The Holy Ghost, the Spirit, he's not down here dealing with the church no more. The church is gone. We're gone. But he ain't here in the tribulation either. The Spirit's taking us up and taking the church out. Taking the church out. And there it is. There he is. Right there in heaven. There's the door. There's the voice. There's the throne. There's the Spirit. We get into chapter 4. We're on the other side of the door. We finally see that voice that's been on that other side of the door. We've made it to that throne, and there it is. That Spirit is right there resting. And the one that sat on the throne, by the way, was God the Father. There's God the Father right there. That Spirit is capitalized in verse number 5, which recognizes a person. There's God the Spirit. But chapter 4 and 5 go together. Don't worry, in the next lesson, chapter 5, you'll see God the Son too. The Trinity, it's all there. It's all going to be there right there in heaven. So how do I want to wrap this up? It's 10 till. I'm just going to wrap up. There was many things that John witnessed and saw. He saw the one that sat on the throne. He saw the rainbow around the throne. He saw the 24 elders, saw the 4 beasts. But you close in verse 10 and 11 primarily. 4 and 20 elders fall down before him that sat on the throne, and they what? They worship. They worship him. And that liveth on the throne forever, ever, cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things for thy pleasure. They are and were created. I think the thing I want to close with and take note of this, when we get to heaven, is worship. 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 He's holy. Worship. Worship. Hey, we might as well get used to it. It's pitiful how little worship we do on this side. We ought to get excited about it. It ought to really excite us that we ought to really worship. Get our eyes off of our situations and one another. It's all about him anyway. And if we get our eyes on him and live for him and do right by him, all these other things, I've always said, these other things take care of themselves, you know. But worship, worship. He's worthy. He's worthy. He's deserving of our praise. He sacrificed. He gave himself for us. He saved us. He sealed us. He's given us. Get our eyes off of our situations again. Let's just get our eyes on the Lord this morning. And I'm done. It's 10 till, so I'm going to stop right there. And I do appreciate your attention. I hope I didn't make things too muddy. It just really drew my interest how his message his last message, boy, there it is right here when we get into heaven. Thank you.